The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Arielle, what were your first thoughts when Descript purchased Squadcast?
Do you want my first thoughts from when it became public or when I found out about it?
When you found out about it.
Okay, I was pumped. This was May of last year, I think, that Zach Moreno and Rock Felder, the founders of Squadcast, told me that it was in the works and I had to be quiet about it. And I immediately was like, oh God, I really hate keeping secrets, but I'll do it. And then I called my mom because that's immunity, is either mother or spouse, and I don't have spouse, so I did mother. So I got to tell her, which was nice because her company also recently had gotten acquired, so she had some advice to give. I was pumped. Immediately, I was just thinking about how great it would be for creators to combine these two products. So quick answer, I mean, excitement. That was my first feeling.
Were you previously a user of Descript before the purchase?
Not really. I had created an account and I had tried it a little bit, but I was not using it in my regular workflow. And it's interesting now to look back on that because I hear people who have the same hesitancy that I used to have. Now I use it at least 3 times a week for a bunch of different podcasts that I work on. And for fun, I just kind of go in there and test things out all the time. And I chat with people who are like, yeah, I've tried it, but I really can't get into it, because you do need to give it a little bit of time, just like you do with every piece of software, in order to work the muscle and make sure that it's within your realm of technological capability. And I remember when I was there, and I used to be such a slower editor, such a slower podcast producer when I used other services. And now I do use Descript, but no, I did not use it initially. I used Squadcast always. I used Squadcast before I worked at Squadcast. I barely used Descript before I worked at Descript.
Were you part of the purchase? Were you part of the acquisition? Because I would think that probably like, yeah, do we get Arielle too to come on over here and be community manager of this? Because you're doing such a good job with Squadcast. It would just seem like the natural transition.
Yes. Most of us came over from Squadcast to Descript. So we did need to interview, but mostly to figure out what positions we would occupy in the new company. Where would we best fit in? Maybe did we want to make a change, right? So I'm in the community space, but I also at Squadcast was doing a lot of marketing, a lot of social media. Did I want to carry that over into Descript? So I had some conversations with HR at Descript, but also with the people that manage the departments that I'm now part of. So yeah, I definitely feel like in addition to the software being acquired, they also acquired the talent that came along with it.
Has your view of video usage in podcasting changed since you've come on with Descript? Obviously, yeah, it's a lot easier to do and there's some great ways to edit it. But did your view about usage of video and podcasting change once you got into Descript?
Yes, but not because of Descript, more so because of the landscape that we are now in. And that is, I think if you were to go online and listen to me speaking on podcasts 2 years ago, you'd hear me say, you don't have to do video. You do not have to do video if you are an audio podcast. And I still believe that to a certain extent. If you want to just do audio, there are people that want to consume your podcast just in audio. Even if there are not, you will find them. If you do not want to create video, you do not have to create video. I know a lot of people love audio because you don't have to get ready for the camera. You can just show up and shut your camera off and feel good. And you don't have to worry so much about what you look like and the implications that that has. However, I have changed my tune in the sense that now it is much easier to make video for podcasts, to extract the video from your Squadcast session, edit that while you're editing your audio, and make a whole episode that you can upload to YouTube, or you can also go and create some clips on social and post them. I think it's easier for the average creator nowadays to do that with tools like Descript or Camtasia, or there's CapCut is a big one. Capwing is another one. There's a few that Opus.pro allows you to clip some things and make some video quickly. It's not necessarily going to lead to immense success for every single person that does venture out into the video world, but my tune has changed in that I used to be vehemently, don't do video if you don't want to do video. And now I'm like, you know what? If you are looking to grow and you are willing to test out video as a potential growth mechanism, it might be worth it for you to do a 3-month trial posting video clips. Not saying it will necessarily be successful, but it might be worth a try.
So why am I doing video right now? How's this going to help my podcast? Because there's a lot of people who say, well, I got to do video. And you might not have to.
I hate that. I hate that you got to do video. Nobody's got to do video. You should do video if you want to, if your listeners are asking for it, or if you want to test out some creative juices that maybe you want to play with video. Maybe you did not use Descript before and then you did when Squadcast was acquired, right? So how were you ever editing video beforehand?
No.
So me either. The only reason I started to be able to edit video is because of Descript. Because when we started at Descript, on our onboarding, one of the tasks that we had to complete was to make a video introducing ourselves to the team, to the entire company, and post it on the Slack channel. And then you get a bunch of emoji reactions and people are like, oh, I love to hear this about you. It's so nice to know that you also play soccer, that kind of thing. So you introduce yourself. And I had no experience editing video before I had to jump into the deep end and record and edit video. You know, in the past, I just recorded and edited audio, but now all of a sudden I can do that. And I take on other projects. Like now when my family has like a big birthday that they're celebrating, somebody's celebrating like their 80th birthday, I can make a video montage pretty easily and I can make the cuts. And that is not something that I could do before. So it's really cool. And I think the reason that you are doing video now is to experiment. I think you are still a podcast about the broadcast industry. You are still a podcast about podcasting. And because of that, your listeners are mostly going to be people who have been listening to podcasts, who listen to like the strict sense of the word podcast for a long time. But you might be able to discover some potential new listeners or consumers if you post on social and somebody searches for the exact right keywords and you pop up, and then maybe you have a clip that goes viral every once in a while.
Descript was for a lot of people and it solved a lot of problems, especially because you see sound waves and it's strange, but now you can see words and you can erase them. Right. And then came video and I said, well, I got to do some video. But then I'm saying, well, I'm not great at doing this stuff. I'm learning, but I'm not great at doing this. One of the things I have found is that there are people on my team who love using Descript. And so tell me about some of the other experiences about Descript when maybe they're a little trepidatious about coming on board and using it, but now they're all in. Some of the new things that have come along is that this just makes my life easier.
Yeah. Well, for me, my Descript unlock moment where I was doing one thing one way for a really long time and I thought that was the easiest it could possibly be. And then somebody showed me what that could look like sped up through Descript. And then I was like, okay, yep, I'm going to have 2 hours back to my day. So for example, I have a podcast about podcast recommendations and I used to record it into Audacity and then go through my recording and cut out my ums and ahs and cut out my retakes and cut out a joke that I made that I didn't like. And it would take me forever because I could only listen back to it in the speed with which I gave it. With Descript, I can listen back on 1.5, 1.75, 2 speed. I can go through my recording very fast and make changes. And then of course I'm going to want to come back and listen to it at regular speed so that I can make sure that it sounds good, that all of my transitions are clear, things like that. But being able to listen back quickly has saved me so much time. So there's that. There's also the ability to shorten word gaps. That's been huge for me because I tend to, when I record my solo podcast, I do a lot of, taking a break and I just said a line, but I want to do that line again, but I might want to get the cadence a little bit different. So I take a second to think about it. So I might leave 2 to 3 seconds of open air. And then I want to get rid of all those 2 to 3 seconds in one fell swoop because I don't necessarily need to go through them and delete them one by one. But what Descript allows me to do is to shorten my what they call word gaps. So when there is just dead air. So you can just do that by having Descript identify where that takes place in the script, and then press a button and they're gone. Same with your filler words like and ah and and sometimes if you repeat a word, it might be considered a filler word. So that's also something that you can play around with. You can either remove your filler words or you can strike through them so that they're still there, but the playback will skip over it so that you could decide later if you want to get rid of them. And I am not a big fan of getting rid of all of your filler words because there's some element of filler words that sounds natural, but I do think that having the option is a nice thing to do, especially if you are looking to make a very quick, fast-paced video or audio piece.
Talk about some of the communities that you have here, because I know Descript has a Discord channel. Squadcast has got the Slack channel. I've been a part of both. And then last week I found myself going to ask a question in Descript on Facebook.
Oh, interesting.
So don't ask me. I just found myself there.
You're just
and
there.
I just said, oh, look, I do have a question to ask about this. It actually came down to leveling both sides of the video. Okay. Again, because I'm trying to do a little bit of video. Am I missing any community groups that are out there?
Well, technically, we don't run the Facebook one. It used to be run by us and then ended up being too many things to take care of. So we actually gave it back to the people and now it's run by users. So that's great. We do check in on it every once in a while, try to answer some questions. Every once in a while, people ask questions that are not necessarily going to be able to be answered by the community. And it is good for us to be able to say, hey, this actually looks like a job for the support team. Please submit a ticket. Sometimes we can render aid right then and there. We can actually give support right on Facebook. But for the most part, our accepted channels are help.descript.com, which is just a forum where you can go for help. Support@descript.com is our email address. And then we've got that Discord that you were referring to, which has 18,000 plus people in it. We do a lot on there. I'll come back to it in a second. And then you also referred to our Slack channel for Squadcast, which will eventually be shutting down. If you have noticed, I've been posting less and less on there because we're really trying to move people over to our Descript owned channels. But back to Discord, we've got a lot going on there. So we've got our introductions channel where you're supposed to post when you're new. We've got our Made in Descript channel, which if you just created a new episode of something that you're proud of, you are absolutely welcome to post it there and either ask for feedback or ask for people to like and comment on it, or even just to be like, look, I'm proud of this. And then we also have our community forum. So that's where people can go to ask and answer questions. And that's really where our support team is hanging out. And it's supposed to be a place where the community helps out each other, because while we have a dedicated support team, we are not on the computer 24/7, and we try to rely on the community as well. There's so much shared knowledge within the community. So we love that about our Discord channel. And then we also have office hours right on our Discord channel. So on Wednesdays, we have Marcelo, who is on our support team. He does an hour-long office hours where he just answers any and all questions that people have about Descript. And then on Thursdays, I do an office half hour with sometimes Marcelo, sometimes Zach Moreno from Squadcast about remote recording specifically. So sort of to transition over the Squadcast users and make sure they have a soft place to land. We are there answering questions. And of course, things get broader than just remote recording or Descript, but we talk about production, we talk about marketing, we talk about just being a content creator on the internet. So we do all of that right within Discord. So that is really the place that I like to push people to, because it's also where we list our events. You can say that you're interested in an event. We do events live on YouTube, like at least once a week. And we keep track of all of the community related endeavors that are going on through our Discord channel.
There's a lot of communities that you're a part of. I mean, the podcast community is one big community. You've listed a few. Have you ever gone and counted all the communities that you're involved with?
No, because I also think the word community means different things at different times to different people. Like, for example, I'm part of a listserv called Public Radio NYC, which is awesome. It's a great listserv. It's sort of a community, sometimes there are events that might come about by way of this group, but we're not necessarily like, let's get together as the Public Radio NYC community. But I would also say that if I met somebody in the wild and I found out that they are also part of this, I'd be like, oh, we're in a community together, essentially.
Talk a little bit about the Podcast Academy. I think it was a couple weeks ago. You gave a lot of people an intro into video.
I did.
And this was not really affiliated with Descript, but you did mention Descript. It was really about like all the ways you could use video. And I think one of the things you did that made it interesting was you kept people engaged as we were going along. Who's using video? Who is not using video? What are your experiences? And from that, I can take away that everybody seems to have a very, very varied experience about video and its usage so far. From what you can see, what things are absolutely true involving the usage of video to this point, let's say in the last year, where a lot of people have picked it up?
What is true about video? That's what you're asking?
What is one thing that I think everybody could agree on when it comes to like the experience of putting your podcast into video form?
Yeah, that there's no silver bullet. I know that sucks as an answer, but it'll be like, I will be a guest on a podcast. So say like this, and then afterwards maybe you'll give me access to the video and I'll throw it into Descript and I'll create some clips for myself using the Find Good Clips feature. I'll upload a bunch of those, and then one of them might get 1.4 thousand views and then another might get 26. I just think the only thing that is for sure true about video for podcasts right now is that nobody understands the algorithm, and we just need to keep experimenting. There are some people that are putting out videos often enough that they are able to glean some truths. Like, for example, there's a guy named Gary Arndt who has a podcast called Everything Everywhere Daily, and he is actually part of another community that I'm a part of called the Podcasting Community on Discord, which I can talk about in a moment. And he is very transparent about how TikTok doesn't really do much for him, even though he gets pretty big view numbers on TikTok, but they don't necessarily convert to his podcast. So there are some people that have figured that out, who have figured out how to go viral, but not necessarily how to move that virality from short form to long form.
So you're not the first person to have told a story like that. I've heard a couple like that so far. There still seems to be a lot of people who have a lot of truths and you must and this, which sort of dovetails into my favorite.
Oh, you and I love
my
this.
favorite clip from a couple weeks ago, which is the level of bullshitting that goes on, whether it's at a conference or it's online or people say you must, and the top 5 reasons that. How do we get away from this?
It's so easy to fall into listening to guru types, because we all want a silver bullet. We all want to be able to say, if I do this, 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 and this, I will be successful. That is like the only thing in life that is not true. No, that's a lie. That is like, you can't do this, this, and this to be successful. It's just, every person has so many different variables. Everything that you put out into the world has so many different variables. Every platform that you put it on has so many different variables. You just need to be willing to continue experimenting and hoping that your stuff reaches the right people, so that those right people must tell their friends, and then you get word of mouth. I think like my main goal in life is to become word of mouth viral with any of my content, because once you hit that, once you are so recommendable, people can't escape you. They need to listen to what you make. They need to see what you make. They just need to be a part of it in some way. And I just don't think that there is one formula for any person to get there. I think that there are generalizations that we can make about certain types of content. For example, if you have a podcast about business, LinkedIn is a good place to go. If you have a comedy podcast, Instagram is a good place to go. But the only reason that is true is because it has been true. Doesn't necessarily mean that it will be true.
So one of the things that is my big takeaway about Arielle Nissenblatt is involvement is key. I mean, keep your loneliness level low if you can, but be a part of communities. We don't have all the answers. Hang around the people who may be able to provide you some guidance and some answers along the way. And to that, the podcast community Discord, I just found out about this an hour ago because, I went into my Discord to go and check on the Descript one. And pop, there's an invite. You invited me to the podcast community Discord. So thank you for doing that.
Of
so
course.
What am I going to find in there now that I've accepted?
Well, I started that in October of 22 because the timeline on when Elon Musk took over Twitter is so murky to me, because there was the maybe he's going to do it, and then there was the he's definitely going to do it, and then there was the delete all your stuff now, get off Twitter. And then there were the people that were like, maybe we can stay, but also like start divesting from it, that kind of thing, put our eggs in another basket. And so in October of 22, I think I really felt a need to create another place for podcast people to hang out and really to try to replicate I think it's like a serendipity feeling about that used to be so great about Twitter, that you could tweet at anyone and they could see it and they could repost it, even if they were like Ira Glass or somebody super famous in podcasting or beyond. Like, everybody's had a cool interaction on Twitter if you experiment with posting. And I wanted to recreate that, and I knew that I was never really going to be able to recreate that on another platform, because Twitter of yore was one thing that can't be recaptured. But I just wanted a place where podcast community folks could go. So I put out a call on Twitter and on a few other social platforms that I was starting this Discord, and it blew up pretty quickly. Like within 5 days had hundreds and hundreds of members. I don't push it very often, but when I do, we get a lot of people joining. I think we're at like 1,500 members now, so it's a really great place, and it stays pretty active. We've got a lot of different channels on there, one for people to recommend podcasts that they're listening to that are not theirs, one for self-promo, one for industry events, one for resources, one for job givers, one for job seekers, a lot of different things, audio magic. We've got so many different subsections, sub-channels within, so that people can sort of choose their own adventure.
Grade threads. Grade threads.
Oh, on A to D or what?
Yeah, 1 out of 10, A to F, effectiveness.
I think it sort of sucks, mostly in the podcast land, because, I mean, here's the thing. It's very highly engaged in that if you go and you post about podcast stuff, you'll probably get a lot of people commenting or liking or being involved, engaged in some way, but it's also a lot of that energy of like follow for follow, leave a comment, and I will follow back everybody who has the word podcast in their profile. And that's not to say that I didn't do that too. I did that a few months ago when Threads was newer, because I have also done that on LinkedIn. I've said like, I want to be connected to everybody in the world that does podcasting for business or that has a podcast. I really do. I'm genuinely curious about that, but there are clearly people on Threads who are doing it for engagement baiting, for engagement farming. And I think you can tell when people are doing it because they just want a whole bunch of new followers. So I think there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of really bad BS-y advice on there for podcast marketing. A lot of people speaking in absolutes. A lot of people speaking without doing research, but just going off of their own personal experience as opposed to the experience of having tested out multiple softwares that do certain things. So I think that it can be honed, but I think for some reason, algorithm there is really strange. I have a friend who wants to be known in the podcast space. She posted one thing about parenting, and now she's going viral for parenting all the time. And she's like, I don't want to do parenting.
Are you still a part of Twitter? Because I know at one point, or maybe you still are, moderator of podcasting Twitter. But I know, as you mentioned, a lot of people
technically, yeah, I'm still on Twitter. I have not been posting as much, but that's not necessarily because of Elon Musk. It's more so just because I'm tired, and I also like have enough going on. When I am on Twitter and I'm posting on Twitter, I give myself work. So for example, I'll be like, post your favorite podcast cover art and I will give it a rating from 1 to 10. So then I have to go through all the responses and rate the podcast cover arts. Or like post the one-liner description of your podcast and I'll tell you if it is something that is compelling based on that 10 words alone. And then I give myself homework. So I stopped doing that. I still do post every once in a while. If somebody posts something really BS-y in terms of advice for podcasters or advice for content creators online, I'll go in and I'll quote tweet it and make fun of it in a nice way. So I will still do that every once in a while, but I haven't been necessarily doing a lot of community building on Twitter lately. I do still moderate the podcasting Twitter community, but I used to do it with Alvin Brooke from Buzzsprout, and we just haven't coordinated on it in a while. So we haven't really done anything new with it, but there is still that community. So if folks aren't familiar, you can still tweet within certain communities so that those tweets are available just to that community, and you can join different communities on different topics.
So one of my favorite things that you've got going is Trailer Park. Yay. I love trailers, and trailers are so important. It's one of the things I see missing from a lot of podcasts. So why is it important for somebody to have a trailer for their podcast?
You gotta have a trailer for your podcast. You just gotta. It's important for a number of reasons. One is because it allows you to populate your RSS feed maybe before you're ready to populate your RSS feed with actual content, with actual episodes. It allows you to launch before you launch. So you can start sending people to your podcast, which is now available on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, before maybe you still need to do a few more weeks of research for your first episode or a few more weeks of honing your post-production for that first episode. So it allows you to have a place to go, and that contributes to the next reason it's important to have a trailer, which is it allows you to market before you're ready to market. It allows you to potentially start reaching out to a bunch of other shows that are similar to yours or that you find that you have some synchronicity with, and to say, I have this trailer. Would you consider dropping it at the end of your next episode? Maybe you can say something like, there's a new show that I think you're going to love. We're going to play the trailer after this episode. So it allows you to do that. And maybe you do something for those collaborative partners in exchange. You're building these relationships with them. It also allows you to make sure you know what your podcast is about. It forces you to hone the information that takes place over your however many episode season and say, what is this podcast really about? It forces you to say, who am I? What's this podcast about? Why am I making it? And who is it made for? So those are just 3 reasons.
So I will just present the difference between a show promo, which can go about 30 seconds to 45 seconds or 60 seconds. A trailer can still be that length, but trailers are often maybe just a touch longer. I'll give you one fun use I did for a trailer. I had a guest on this podcast, and one of the reasons he was on was because he has a brand new podcast. And about a week before I feed dropped the trailer in and said, this person's going to be a guest in advance. By the way, you should probably hook up and get to know this podcast. We're going to be talking with him in another week. So you're right. There's all sorts of things you can do with it. And I think that idea that you have about putting the trailer at the end of an episode on somebody else's show is just, it's gold.
Yeah. Another reason to have a trailer is because the podcast hosting providers at this point, most, if not all of them, allow you to mark your episodes as either bonus episodes, regular episodes, or trailers. And you should use that space. You should use that real estate. Also because podcast listening apps usually also delineate that. So if you go to Apple, you can see when something is marked as a trailer, and it's supposed to be something that you are pushing your listeners to, so that if they just come across your cover art, they're attracted to your cover art, they're attracted to your title. The next thing their eyes are going to go to is your trailer. So you're going to have a lot of plays on your trailer. Like for all of my podcasts, the most plays are on the trailer. And that is because that is the first thing they're exposed to. It's going to reach the widest audience. And then, of course, it's going to funnel from there. So podcasts about podcast trailers is not for everybody, but a lot of people were maybe interested in finding out if it was for them. So they hit play on the trailer and then decide.
Oh, I think it's a great place to find ideas for a trailer. And you can also redo your trailer once a year.
Anytime. Yeah. Anytime you have a new season, anytime you maybe have a series, like you could really go all out. Trailer.
And I love your co-host, Tim. I am firmly camping beside him on the trailer being short and effective. Although I think in one of your recent episodes, it did go long and it was very good. It did not bore by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm all for a short trailer, except for I think mine is over 3 minutes. So I'm like, I'm pushing
You're not even taking your own advice, bro.
Oh, come on. I think I'm so important.
Yes, it must be long. We must hear absolutely everything that you have to say.
Yeah, I might be in the market to redo my trailer.
Well, you should do it as like a learn along with me as I redo my trailer.
How's your podcast idea coming along? The one where, parents try to explain what their adult children do for a living, and when can I be on an episode?
Yeah. Context. Would you like context?
I think I can provide it. I think you...
I can
go
provide
ahead.
it
Yes,
if you want.
Please.
Okay. I think it was July 9th, 2021. I tweeted that there should be a podcast where parents try to explain what their adult children do for a living. I was at my parents' house at the time and just visiting for a few days. And I think my dad asked me earlier that morning, how's the podcast world? And I was like, you have no clue what I do. You have no clue what I do. And he doesn't know how to access a podcast. He still has questions about the difference between podcast and radio. He still just doesn't quite understand. And it just made me realize that a lot of parents probably can't explain what their adult children do for a living. And I will say, because I have gotten the ageism accusation here, I also can't explain what my mom does. I can't explain what the next generation does. So it really goes both ways. It's really this fundamental disconnect. And I will also say, I don't think we know a lot of what our friends do. So sometimes it is people who are completely in your age, in your generation. We don't always know. But it's like this interesting thing that it's wholesome to figure out like how your parents are when they're at dinner parties explaining what their beloved children are doing for a living. So I tweeted this thinking it would maybe do some numbers in the podcast world, but it did numbers beyond the podcast world. Hundreds of thousands of impressions, lots and lots of comments, a lot of people reaching out to me and saying, you got to make this podcast. So this was, of course, almost 3 years ago. And I have made some attempts at making the podcast. I recorded a bunch of interviews in 2021, 2022, put together a trailer, put together a deck, pitched it to iHeartRadio. They ultimately passed. So I took a little bit of a break from it, but I do intend to eventually make it because the meme accounts on Instagram and on Twitter and even on other social platforms start reposting this every once in a while. And every time they do, I get new followers. I get new people telling me I must make this show. And it's the tweet that will never die.
You and Lauren Purcell at Podcast Movement last year, you were up on stage. You've got your doctor's coats on. You were the podcast medics, as it were, to repair podcasts and solve the problems and maybe issue a prescription or two. So what do you find needs to be prescribed the most to podcasters these days? What mistakes are you seeing them make the most of?
The mistakes that podcasters make now are not super different from the mistakes that they were making 5 years ago, 2 years ago. It's going in without a marketing plan, going in without outlining a season, going in thinking your show is going to be always on and not necessarily planning for it to take a break at times, not having a plan for if you take a break. So maybe you're going to set up some feed swaps or feed drops, and also not listening to podcasts, not listening to other podcasts before you start your own.
So you've given a couple of pieces of advice in the last year. I don't know where and when. They've just popped up, but I can sort of hear Arielle saying that I need to make this change in my life. And one of them is involving newsletters. So for years I had one, then I stopped. Now I've got one. It is back and I'm sticking with it and I'm doing it every week. So for anybody who doesn't have one, why do these things work?
Newsletters were, caveat, asterisk. I think you should have a newsletter. You should at least be, as a podcaster, collecting email addresses because you don't own access to a list of the people that subscribe to your podcast. Yes, there are people that might leave you a rating and review on Apple, a star rating on Spotify. Maybe on other platforms, they're raising their hand and saying, I listen to this podcast. Maybe they're going to your fan list website and leaving you a voice note or going to your Patreon and contributing to the projects that you make. But there's no master list somewhere of all the people that regularly tune into your RSS feed. And because of that, you sort of need to seek that out on your own so that when people sign up for a newsletter, when they opt in to receive correspondence from you, you now have permission to send them emails. And hopefully those emails are going to be good emails and they're not going to be spammy and they're going to be additive to the podcast listening experience. But the reason that newsletters can work, and I think that's maybe how we can navigate that asterisk, is because it gives you yet another touch point with your listeners. And hopefully some of those listeners are loyal listeners who want to hear from you. And the reason they've subscribed is because they understand the value proposition.
And I think that's a great point because I know I said, why do these things work? And so this assumption that all newsletters are going to work. And why my newsletter didn't really work the first time around was because I don't think I was as authentic as I could have been. And so the commitment every week is to sit down and write something that I'm feeling, that I believe in, that I want to share. And if it's podcast advice, I'm now just going to preface it with, this may or may not be true, just given all the BS that goes on.
The funny thing about advice about any creative thing in general is the answer should always be it depends, unless I am sitting down with you and I have listened to a bunch of your episodes and I've looked at your website and I've looked at your social and I can actually answer individual questions about your show, not shows in general.
Lots to choose from. There's MailChimp, there's Constant Contact, and you suggested to me Beehive.
Yeah, I like Beehive lately.
Yeah, thank you for that. Why does it work? Why do you like it?
Yeah, I used MailChimp for years and years and years, and it just kept getting more expensive. It was the thing that I learned email marketing on because of Serial, because they advertised with Serial, which is great. I'm really grateful to MailChimp for being an inside joke for podcast listeners everywhere. MailChimp, that's really fun for us as podcast listeners. And yeah, I spent a lot of money with MailChimp over the years and grateful to them, but also want something that's going to be a little bit more sustainable. So Beehive is one set price as of now, and they have all these really cool creator coordination networks within. So I can recommend other newsletters and those newsletters can recommend me, which is really fun. I can also get paid to recommend and potentially refer other newsletters, refer people to those newsletters. So that's great. And I've really been enjoying that. And I also will say it's a lot easier to set up than MailChimp is. It's less mysterious, much easier to build templates. And also they're really fun on social media. And I think honestly, that's how I became aware of them in the first place, was social media, word of mouth. A friend recommended it. And I actually got to get on a call with somebody from Beehive 2 years ago or so who was like, here's why this would work for your newsletter. So nice customer service too.
And tell me about Earbuds Collective. This one arrives sometime Sunday night, Monday, in that zone. I love opening it up. It's podcast recommendations generally. And you'll have to, this is a test, by the way. I just want to repeat this so that I tell the story properly to other people. And that somebody will curate a list of podcasts. One of those episodes could be a podcast that they have done themselves, but 5 others from that particular genre to a list that sort of form a collective and a comprehensive listening piece. Does that sound right?
4 others. 4 others. So 5 total.
Yeah. So why do podcast recommendation newsletters work?
They work for me. I subscribe to so many newsletters. I subscribe to so many podcast newsletters, so many podcast recommendation newsletters, industry newsletters, everything. I just love being up to date on all of that. I started the newsletter because in 2017 was realizing that there were so many podcasts and I wanted there to be some sort of way to cut through what might be worth my time, what might not be worth my time. So I started this newsletter hoping that other people could curate lists for me so that I would always know what to listen to. So that's why I started it. Other podcast newsletters have other types of missions. So for example, Podcast Delivery comes out every Monday and it's one new podcast of the last 7 to 14 days. Find That Pod comes out on Fridays and it's also 5 podcast episodes not on a theme but sort of just curated by the founder of Find That Pod. Podcast Review is interesting because it's reviews of podcasts plus a few listicles here and there. Podcast The Newsletter is Lauren Purcell's newsletter where it's just everything that she loves. She calls it a love letter to podcasting. Pretty much everything she listened to in the past week, she writes about it and it's great. So I think podcast newsletters work because people have varied interests and we need to find a way to highlight the podcasts that are out there that are not necessarily going to find audiences on their own. That's why we've got curators who listen to all these podcasts and then hopefully evangelize those podcasts to the right audience, to what might be the right audience.
Congratulations on your election to the Board of Governors of the Podcast Academy. I've been a member since its inception. I think it's great. It's affordable too, I believe. I actually have accidentally renewed for 2 years, which you're not even supposed to be able to do, but I accidentally hit refresh when you're not supposed to hit refresh after you're giving your credit card. So I'm sitting here on an extended membership. But for those who just want to come out for 1 year, tell us why we should all be a part of the Podcast Academy.
The Podcast Academy is still definitely in its infancy. So I think now is the time to really get behind it and offer your time, offer your services, offer your mentorship so that we can grow the academy so that it can be where I think other creative academies are. And the Podcast Academy is the engine behind the AMBIes, which is the Awards for Excellence in Audio. There's mentorship programs as part of the Podcast Academy. There are IRL, that's something that I only type. There are real life and virtual events that you can take part in that are member only and open to the public. And there's just some really cool discounts that you can get by being a member of the Podcast Academy. So I think people need to join because it further professionalizes the industry. And the more people that join, the more we professionalize the industry and give ourselves and each other more opportunities to grow and to meet new listeners and to meet new collaborators.
And I pointed this out earlier because I saw you last at an event which was sponsored by the Podcast Academy about video. And when these things come up, it is very, very helpful to grab some information. So thank you. And thanks for being a part of the show today. I really appreciate it. It's so good to talk to you again, Arielle.
A blast and a half. Thank you for having me.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.